My parents left me a note on my wedding day. It said, "Let's see how you face the guests when we will not be appearing." I stood in my robe, hours before walking down the aisle, clutching that single sentence, written in my mother's familiar handwriting. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. They were gone. They had vanished without warning, deliberately abandoning me. And they wanted me to suffer. But instead of screaming or begging, I just breathed. You won't believe what happened next. My name is Autumn Parker. I'm 27. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, in a working-class neighborhood where I learned early that some children are born second place. For me, that second place was behind my younger brother, Cody. He was the sun. I was the shadow. No matter what I achieved, I was always just the daughter, the quiet one, the one who didn't need much, the one who could handle disappointment. But what my parents didn't realize, what they never understood, was that quiet doesn't mean weak. When they tried to humiliate me in front of 150 guests on the most important day of my life, they had no idea who they were really dealing with. Before I tell you how I turned betrayal into power, take a second to like this video, drop your city in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about choosing strength when others expect you to crumble. Now let me take you back to the beginning of this mess. I grew up on the west side of Cleveland. Our house was a modest brick split level with faded shutters and a patchy front lawn. My dad, Roger Parker, ran a small contracting business. He built decks and remodeled kitchens when times were good. My mom, Denise, was an accountant for a local logistics firm. And then there was Cody, my golden little brother. From as far back as I can remember, Cody could do no wrong. When I was in 3rd grade, I won the state spelling bee. I still remember holding the heavy trophy, my name etched into the gold plate, hoping for some sort of celebration. My parents smiled politely, said good job, then immediately pivoted to Cody's soccer game that weekend. He'd scored a single goal in a game they lost. That was the story they told the neighbors. By high school, I had learned to clap for myself. No one else was going to. I graduated valedictorian, no ceremony attendance from my parents. Cody had twisted his ankle at football practice and needed emotional support. I got a full-ride scholarship to the University of Michigan, paid for my books and clothes by working part-time in a bakery and babysitting faculty kids. Meanwhile, Cody was burning through my parents' money-chasing business ideas he never finished. My mom used to say, "Cody just needs the right opportunity." I wanted to ask, what do I need? When I landed a marketing job at a top firm in New York City after graduation, it felt like air for the first time. I packed 2 suitcases and took a one-way flight to LaGuardia, leaving behind the resentment, the smallness, the invisible daughter role. I shared a tiny Brooklyn apartment with 2 other women and hustled my way up the corporate ladder. Promotions didn't come easy, but I earned them. Every single one. Back home, Cody had dropped out of community college and launched 3 businesses that failed before they even had logos. My parents bailed him out every time. Still, I called on birthdays. I sent them updates. I invited them to my big moments. Each time I hoped maybe now they'll be proud. They never were. But all of that background, that's just the prelude. The real story starts one evening at a fundraising gala in Manhattan. I was running logistics for a Children's Health Foundation event at Lincoln Center. I had a clipboard in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other when I collided literally with a man holding a glass of water. A splash hit his sleeve. I gasped. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." He smiled. Not a tight, annoyed smile, a warm, easy one. You may have just saved me from bidding on a vase I didn't even like. I laughed, for the first time that night. He introduced himself as Nate, just Nate. We talked for a few minutes while I caught my breath. He asked about my job, not in that patronizing way people often do, but with genuine curiosity. I figured he was a donor, polished, charming, but grounded. When he asked me to dinner, I hesitated for about 3 seconds before saying yes. Our first date was at a quiet Italian place in the village, not the kind of flashy restaurant I expected. Nate drove a normal car, wore jeans and a soft flannel, laughed easily. He asked more about my childhood than my outfit. On our third date, he brought me to a community garden in Brooklyn where he volunteered with kids on the weekends. I was falling and fast, and still, I had no idea who he really was. That reveal wouldn't come until much later. And when it did, it shook everything. But even that wasn't what changed the trajectory of my life. No. That moment came on a sunny Saturday morning, in a hotel suite filled with bridesmaids and peonies. When I learned what my parents had done, back then, if you'd asked me if I still craved my parents' approval, I would have laughed and said, "No way." I had a job. My own place in Manhattan. A closet I paid for with my own money. I was independent, grown, past all that. But the truth, that little girl inside me, the one holding her spelling bee trophy while her parents talked about Cody's soccer stats, she never really stopped hoping. And that hope, that quiet, painful flicker, it's how they kept hurting me. Over and over again, Cody Parker was the golden boy, always had been. When we were kids, he got everything. Piano lessons, private soccer coaches, snowboarding trips to Vermont. One time, he decided he liked hockey for about 2 weeks and my dad dropped $800 on brand new gear. He used it twice. Meanwhile, I was patching the soles of my sneakers with duct tape because asking for new ones felt like too much. I didn't even get bitter at first. I just thought maybe I wasn't doing enough. Maybe I had to earn it harder. So I tried. I stayed late at school, volunteered, tutored kids after class, worked every summer job I could find. Nothing changed. When I brought home straight A's, they asked if I could keep it up. When Cody barely passed gym, my mom bought him a milkshake and told him how proud she was that he pushed through. By the time I got to college, I'd trained myself not to expect anything. I bought my own books, worked weekend shifts at a coffee shop, and accepted that family support wasn't part of my story. I thought putting distance between us, physical distance, would make things easier. But phone calls still carried that same cold imbalance. Every birthday check-in, every holiday dinner, it was always Cody first. "Oh, he's launching something new. Oh, he got a lead on a training facility idea. Oh, can you believe how hard he's trying?" And when I shared that, I was promoted crickets, or worse dismissal. My dad once said, "Marketing is just making stuff look pretty and tricking people into buying it." He meant it as a joke, but it hit like a slap. I won't lie, starting over in New York was brutal. Rent in Brooklyn made my stomach hurt. My office had cutthroat vibes, and I was one of the only women of color on my team. But for the first time, I was building something that was mine. Entirely mine. No safety nets, no backup plans, just grit, caffeine, and a small fire inside my chest that refused to go out. And then Nate entered my life. At first, I didn't let myself believe it was real. Men like him weren't supposed to look at girls like me. Not with that kind of gentle curiosity. Not with respect. He remembered my coffee order, listened when I talked about my clients, celebrated when I closed a deal. He never tried to compete or one-up me. He was proud of me, genuinely. I started to imagine something I'd never allowed myself before, a future that felt like home. But even then, I kept him a secret from my family for a while. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to protect what we had. From their judgment, their cynicism, their ability to poison anything they couldn't control. When I finally told them I was dating someone serious, their reactions were so on brand it was laughable. "Does he make enough money real estate that market's unstable? You sure he's not using you to get ahead?" The irony was cruel. They thought I was dating a man who wanted something from me, when all they ever wanted from me was a connection to someone like him. Nate proposed after a year and a half. It wasn't flashy, no rooftop violinists or viral flash mobs. It was just the two of us in that same community garden where we'd planted seedlings with Brooklyn kids months earlier. He knelt in dirt-stained jeans, held out a simple but breathtaking ring, and said, "I love your strength, your heart, your mind. I don't care what last name you take, just take mine if you want it." I said yes, through tears. We didn't want a royal wedding. We chose a restored estate in Hudson Valley, a 150-guest limit, and a ceremony that felt personal and intentional. His parents, Claire and Harrison Bennett, were surprisingly warm. Wealthy, yes, but grounded. Claire asked about my childhood. Harrison told me stories about his early failures and made sure I knew I had a place in their family. That weekend, for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere, which made what happened next so much harder. Calling my mom and dad to tell them I was engaged was nerve-wracking in a way I didn't expect. "Engaged," my mom repeated. "Flat. To who? Someone from your job, real estate. So he sells houses." I wanted to scream. Instead, I swallowed the frustration and gave them space to digest it. We agreed they'd visit the next month and meet Nate over dinner. That dinner was awful. Cody came too, which didn't help. He made passive-aggressive jokes all night mocking Nate's car, questioning his degree, making cracks about me aiming higher. My parents, they interrogated Nate about money, stability, and family plans. Not once did they ask how we met, what we loved about each other, or how happy I was. After dessert, my mom pulled me aside. "You always had big plans." "Autumn," she said, "marriage can limit a woman." It took everything in me not to laugh in her face. After all the years they'd downplayed my ambition, they suddenly remembered it the second it threatened their control. Then, we invited them to the Bennett's penthouse for dinner. That's when everything changed. When they stepped off the elevator and saw the Central Park views, the marble floors, the original Rothko on the wall, my mother's eyes lit up in a way I'd never seen before. My father suddenly turned polite. Cody started calling Nate bro. And just like that, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was a gateway. They didn't care about me. They cared about access. It was clear and disgusting. But I still hoped they'd pull back, that they'd realize what they were doing. I still hoped they'd be there for me on my wedding day for the right reasons. I had no idea they were planning to burn the whole thing down instead. If there was ever a moment I should have known something was coming, it was that night in the penthouse. My parents' tone shifted the second they realized who Nate really was, Nate Bennett, heir to the Bennett real estate dynasty, the name that appeared in Forbes, the family that funded museums and built half the skyline. Suddenly, my mom cared about flowers. My dad wanted to help with venue selection. Cody started name-dropping Nate like they were frat brothers. None of them had ever shown interest in my life, my job, my milestones, but now that my last name was going to be Bennett, I was worth something. But it wasn't me they were valuing. It was the access I represented. And it only got worse. 3 months before the wedding, I got a call from my mom. She opened with, "So, I've been thinking we should invite the Hanleys and the Crawfords." "Oh, and your dad has a list too." I froze. "Wait, who? Just a few business associates and family friends. About 20 extra people?" We had already finalized the guest list. Nate and I had agreed 150 people. Max. Carefully chosen. People we loved. People who loved us. Not people looking to rub elbows with the Bennetts over champagne. "The venue won't hold more than what we planned," I said carefully. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "These are important connections. Your father's business could benefit." "This isn't a networking event," I said. "It's our wedding." And then came the line I should have seen coming. "If you don't include them, we may not come at all." She said it like she was daring me to call her bluff, like she believed I couldn't possibly let them miss my wedding. I told Nate everything that night. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Let them cool off. They won't miss their own daughter's wedding." He was wrong. 1 week before their wedding, they flew into New York. They said they were coming to help with preparations, but it became clear fast they had their own agenda. They stayed in Midtown, not with us. Barely helped. Spent most of their time shopping, sightseeing, and most disturbingly asking Nate for intros to people in his parents' circle. One evening during rehearsal dinner prep, my mother casually announced, "The Harrises and Schmidts are confirmed. They're so excited." I stared at her. "They're not invited." "Well, I told them they were. I already sent them the address." "You what?" "This is a family event," my father chimed in. "You're being selfish." I snapped. Years of silence, tolerance, and overlooked wounds boiled over. "Selfish," I said. "You mean the way you always prioritized Cody's failures over my accomplishments. The way you forgot every one of my graduations, my promotions, but you show up for this now. When you smell money in the room." My mom's lips thinned. "If that's how you feel, maybe we shouldn't come at all." My chest tightened. I could barely breathe. But I met her eyes. "That's your choice. But the wedding will go on with or without you." They left in a huff. No apology. No attempt to bridge the gap. Just a storm of hurt that felt strangely final. 3 days later, the morning of the wedding arrived. Sunlight poured through the hotel windows. My bridesmaids fluttered around me hair. Makeup, final details. Everyone was excited. Except me. Something in my stomach wouldn't settle. I hadn't heard from my parents since that argument. They had checked into a nearby hotel for the weekend, but had been silent. At 9:30 a.m., my maid of honor, Rachel, tried calling them to coordinate rides to the venue. No answer, she said, confused. "Try Cody's room," I offered. Still nothing. "Maybe they're already en route," I suggested, trying to sound casual. But deep down, I already knew. An hour passed. Then I called the hotel myself. "Hi, I'm checking on some guests in rooms 1812 and 1813. The Parker family." Pause. "I'm sorry, ma'am." The front desk clerk said, "Those rooms were checked out this morning, around 5 Huzzurs a.m. My heart dropped. "They checked out?" "Yes. They left a message for you. Would you like us to send someone with it?" I hung up in silence. The world slowed around me. My parents had left. On my wedding day. Without a word. And they'd left a message. Rachel went to retrieve it while I sat on the edge of the bed. Veil still untouched. Hands clenched in my lap. When she returned, her expression said everything. She handed me a plain envelope. Inside was one line. "Let's see how you face the guests when we will not be appearing at your wedding." A small post-it was attached. "We've decided to use the money set aside for Cody's business to take a family trip instead, since it's clear you no longer value our presence." My chest cracked open. The kind of pain that doesn't make a sound, just squeezes every part of you at once. I felt like I was underwater watching everyone around me panic while I just sat still. Who does that? Who leaves their child on their wedding day deliberately, cruelly, and dares to call it a consequence? Rachel whispered. "You need to call Nate." "I can't," I said. "Yes, you can." So I did. I told him everything. My voice shaking. The note. The early checkout. The message. He didn't even pause. "I'm coming over," he said. "But the tradition, I don't care about superstition. You need me. I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, Nate walked into that hotel suite, still in his tuxedo pants, shirt sleeves rolled, bow tie hanging undone. He pulled me into his arms without a word. And I broke. But in his arms, I didn't feel broken. I felt protected. "Whatever we do," I whispered, "people will talk." Nate pulled back just enough to look at me. "Let them. This is still our day, and no one, not even them, is going to ruin that." And he was right. Because what came next wasn't just a wedding, it was a rebirth. Nate didn't ask me what I wanted to do next. He didn't push or try to fix it with grand gestures. He just stayed, held me, let me fall apart in his arms without rushing me to pull it together. That was the moment I knew I hadn't lost anything that mattered. Because when people walk out of your life to hurt you, they're not your family. But when someone walks in, right in the middle of your worst hour and chooses to stay, that's everything. An hour later, Claire and Harrison arrived at the hotel. Nate had called them quietly while I was still in shock. I hadn't even realized he'd stepped away. They didn't come with pity or judgment. Claire came in like steady warmth, taking my hands in hers. Autumn, she said, catching herself with a soft smile. I know we can't undo what's happened, but we would be honored to stand beside you today however you need. Then Harrison added something that caught me completely off guard. If you'll allow it, I would be proud to walk you down the aisle. The weight of his words hit me with such force, I couldn't answer. I just nodded, tears blurring my vision again, but this time for a different reason. I'd love that, I finally whispered. Claire squeezed my hands tighter. And I'd love to help you get ready, if that feels right. In those two simple offers, they gave me something I'd never truly had before: unconditional support. Claire sat beside me as the hairstylist curled and pinned. She told stories about her own wedding day, how her dress zipper broke, how her veil got caught in the wind, how she didn't feel beautiful until Harrison looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. Your glow, she said, brushing a strand of hair from my face, has nothing to do with foundation or false lashes. It comes from how deeply you're loved. She helped me into my gown, fastened the buttons with care, slipped my grandmother's pearl necklace around my neck. I looked in the mirror. Somehow, despite everything, I looked calm, grounded. That was Claire's gift. Her presence turned panic into grace. Just as we were finishing, there was a knock. Rachel opened it and froze. Standing there was a woman I hadn't seen in over a decade. Aunt Valerie. She looked older. Sure. A few more silver strands. But her eyes, my mother's eyes, only softer still, held that familiar warmth. I heard, she said gently, holding a small gift bag, and I wasn't going to come. I figured I wouldn't be welcome. But then I got a call from a young man named Nate. My breath caught. He said, Autumn's heart is too good to say it out loud, but she needs you, and I think you'd want to be there. So here I am. I stepped forward and hugged her before she could finish her sentence. I'm so glad you are, I whispered. Somewhere deep in the chaos of this day, something beautiful had taken root. A different kind of family was forming, one built on love, not obligation, not with Claire, Aunt Valerie, and my bridesmaids helping. The bridal suite shifted from a space of heartbreak to a room filled with warmth. The wedding planner poked her head in. Everyone is seated. But, there are a few reporters outside. Word got out the Bennetts are here. I sighed, but Claire just smiled. It's okay, I said. Let them take their pictures from the sidewalk. I have nothing to hide today. When the music started, my stomach fluttered not from nerves, but from something else, a quiet, confident resolve. This wasn't just a ceremony anymore. It was a statement. I wasn't standing in spite of what they did to me. I was standing because of who I'd become without them. When Harrison appeared in the doorway, dressed in his tuxedo, boutonniere pinned perfectly, I nearly broke again. But this time, I smiled. It's an honor to stand in today, he said gently, though I know this isn't how you pictured your wedding. No, I agreed, but it might be better. He offered his arm. I took it. And together, we stepped out into the sunlit garden. Guests turned to look. some with curiosity, some with sympathy, but none of that mattered. Because at the end of the aisle stood Nate, steady. Sure, eyes locked on mine. In that moment, everything else faded away. The officiant spoke warmly. When it was time for the question, "Who gives this woman to be married?" Harrison answered clearly. "Her aunt and my wife and I do." Aunt Valerie wept silently in the front row. Claire smiled through tears. Then Nate spoke his vows. "Autumn, I promise to be your partner and equal, to never silence your voice, and to always protect your peace. I promise to build a family with you that feels safe, seen, and loved every single day." I steadied my breath before speaking mine. "Nate, I promise to never make love conditional. I promise to raise our future children with honesty and warmth, to create a home that feels like freedom. I promise you'll never have to wonder if you matter, because you do. Always." When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause felt thunderous, cleansing. Nate kissed me like we'd fought through fire to get here, and maybe we had. The family I was born into tried to destroy me, but the family I chose, they carried me through. The moment we stepped off that garden aisle, I thought the hardest part was behind us. But what I didn't realize yet, what was still quietly unfolding, was that the real revenge wasn't anger or exposure. It was visibility, grace, joy. And nothing terrifies small people more than a woman who refuses to break the way they expected her to. The historic mansion's ballroom had been transformed strings of lights, gold-rimmed glasses, peonies in full bloom. A string quartet played softly while guests found their seats, laughing and sipping champagne. It should have felt like a fairy tale. But I still felt the sting, the hollow space where my parents were supposed to be. Except that space wasn't empty. Claire, without saying a word to me, had the extra table quietly removed. She had the seating chart adjusted the night before, just in case, she told the planner. So when I walked into the reception, there were no reminders of who was missing, only proof of who showed up. And that made all the difference. I'd been dreading the father-daughter dance for weeks. Even before the note, before the abandonment, I knew it was going to be hard. What do you do when the person who should walk you to the center of the room chose silence over support? But Harrison, in his steady way, offered an idea. "What if," he said, "we invite all the parental figures in the room to join us? You and I can start. Then Nate and Claire. Then anyone else who wants to dance with their child. Make it a celebration of every kind of family, not just the ones tied by blood." It was perfect. When the time came, he led me onto the floor, just the two of us at first. Then Claire joined with Nate. Then Aunt Valerie stood and pulled Rachel, my maid of honor, into the mix. Other guests followed, mothers and sons, uncles and nieces, step-parents, mentors. Soon, the dance floor was full. Not of tradition, but of truth. That moment didn't erase what my family had done, but it rewrote the script. After dinner and toasts, Nate stood and asked for the room's attention. He wasn't flashy or loud. He didn't clear his throat or tap a glass. He just stood with that quiet, calm strength that first drew me to him and spoke. "Today reminded me," he said, "that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes. Family is who shows up for you, who listens, who holds your hand when the floor falls out." He turned to me, eyes shining. "Autumn, you've taught me more about resilience and integrity than I ever learned in boardrooms or textbooks. You didn't just survive today, you rose." Then he raised his glass. "To my wife, who proves that we don't inherit our worth from where we come from. We build it." The applause that followed wasn't polite or rehearsed. It was real. People didn't just cheer, they stood. And somewhere deep inside, That little girl in patched-up sneakers finally felt seen. What we didn't know, what none of us saw coming, was that a few of those photographers near the edge of the garden earlier, they weren't just snapping for society pages. One worked for a national morning show. They had been tipped off that the Bennett heir was getting married in upstate New York. And when they found out the bride's parents had abandoned the wedding, but the groom's father stepped in to walk her down the aisle, that was news. By the next morning, a 90-second segment aired under the headline, "Chosen Family, a Wedding That Redefined Tradition." The footage showed me walking down the aisle with Harrison, Claire adjusting my veil, the group dance, the speech. The anchor closed with, "Sometimes the families we build shine brighter than the ones we're born into." The clip went viral, and while I hadn't planned to tell the world what happened, I didn't mind that they knew, because they didn't see me crying in a hotel suite. They saw me walking, smiling, rising, and that was enough. We left for our honeymoon in Tulum the next day. No phones, no notifications, just ocean air, temples, and space to heal. And that healing wasn't just about my parents. It was about letting go of a story I'd been telling myself since I was 8, that if I just did more, they'd love me better. That story was over now. And in its place, a different one where I got to define what family meant, one where joy wasn't contingent on approval, one where I could say no without guilt, and yes without permission. I didn't need revenge. I needed peace. But what I got was both. Tulum gave me time to breathe, to rest, to let go. The ocean didn't ask questions. The air didn't care what my last name was. There were no passive-aggressive texts, no polite guilt trips, just sunlight and silence and Nate. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I wasn't chasing something. I wasn't trying to earn approval or prove my worth. I was just living, fully present, fully free. But back in the U.S., things were moving. Fast. We had no idea the wedding had gone viral. A friend of Nate's texted him while we were boarding the flight home. "Dude, your wife broke the internet. Call me when you land." It wasn't until we touched down at JFK and turned our phones back on that we saw the flood of notifications. The wedding had been picked up by nearly every major outlet. Not because of the dress or the venue or the Bennett name, but because of the story. Bride abandoned by her own parents. Walked down the aisle by her father-in-law. Chosen family triumphs in emotional. Hudson Valley. Wedding. A modern wedding redefines family loyalty. Clips of the ceremony played on the Today Show. People stitched my vows on TikTok. Someone posted a side-by-side of me smiling at the altar with the caption, "Let them underestimate you. Then let them watch." And then, my phone started ringing. First a few times, then nonstop. Calls from Cleveland area codes, texts from unknown numbers, voicemails from my mother's cell. I didn't listen to them right away, but eventually, curiosity won out. The first message from my mom was high-pitched, nervous. "Autumn, we saw the wedding on TV. Why didn't you tell us he was that Bennett? Call us, please." Then came my dad's voice, gruff, but attempting concern. "Look, maybe we didn't handle everything right, but we're family. Let's move forward." Then Cody, "Hey, so now that you're all famous, I was thinking we could talk about that training center I told you about. I've got a pitch deck." I wanted to laugh. I almost did. But what I felt, more than anything, was confirmation. They hadn't changed. They weren't sorry. They were just embarrassed they missed the spotlight. A week after we returned to New York, our doorman called up. "Miss Parker, your parents and brother are here." Should I send them up? I froze. "They didn't call first," I asked. "No, ma'am." I turned to Nate. He was already standing, calm but protective. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I thought for a long second, then nodded. "Let them up. We need to end this." When they walked into our living room, it was like a performance. My mother in a new dress, carrying a gift bag, my dad in stiff khakis, Cody looking around like he'd already mentally picked out his corner office. "Autumn," my mom said, opening her arms. I didn't move. "I was on my honeymoon," I said evenly. "You called 60 times, but you missed the wedding you were invited to." My father cleared his throat. There was a misunderstanding. I laughed one sharp exhale. "You left a note saying, 'Let's see how you face the guests without us.'" That wasn't confusion. That was cruelty. "We were upset," my mom snapped. "You excluded people who matter to us." "It was my wedding," I said quietly. "It should have been about Nate and me. You made it about you." The room went silent. Cody wandered over to the wall, pointing at a framed painting. "Is this an original? Looks expensive?" "It's a gift," Nate replied. "From a family friend." Cody nodded. "Must be nice. You really leveled up, huh? I'd had enough." "If you're here to apologize," I said, "do it. But if you're here for something else, you can leave right now." My mom smiled in that brittle way she did when she was trying to salvage appearances. "Of course we're sorry, sweetheart. We just want to move forward." Then came the punchline. "We were thinking maybe your father-in-law could meet with Cody. He's got a solid business plan. Really innovative." The audacity was breathtaking. "You mean the business you used the wedding fund to bankroll when you ditched me?" I asked. Cody shrugged. "Family helps family, right?" Nate stepped in, his voice low but firm. "My family isn't a networking opportunity. Before they left, my mother noticed a wedding photo on the mantel with Claire and Harrison, Aunt Valerie beside us. "You invited her," she hissed. "You mean Aunt Valerie?" I said. "Yes, the one who stood by me when you vanished. She turned her back on us years ago." "No," I corrected. "She stood up to you. There's a difference." My father's voice rose. "You've changed. These people changed you." "No," I said. "They helped me remember who I was before I spent my life earning scraps from you." "And us?" he asked. "Where does that leave us?" I looked at him and saw not a father, but a man afraid of losing control. "That's up to you," I said. "But if we're going to have a relationship, it has to be real. No manipulation, no favoritism. No more treating me like I'm only valuable when I'm useful." They didn't answer. They left soon after. No hugs, no apologies. Just silence. The kind that follows when someone finally realizes they're no longer the main character in your story. I didn't slam the door after they left. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't post anything online. I just stood there in the quiet, the city lights outside our windows flickering across the glass, and realized I felt okay. Better than okay. I felt free. Not because they were gone, but because I finally stopped chasing something I was never going to get. Their version of love came with conditions, ultimatums, and a lifetime of feeling not quite enough. Mine didn't. Rebuilding. Differently. A few months after the wedding, I made a decision that surprised even me. I left my marketing job. Not because I had to, not because Nate or the Bennetts expected me to, but because I wanted to build something that felt like mine. Claire helped me brainstorm the early stages. Harrison connected me with advisors who wouldn't just rubber stamp me as the Bennett daughter-in-law. And Nate. He supported me in the background, always making sure I had space to lead. I launched Kindle Strategies, a boutique agency specializing in nonprofit campaigns and social impact branding. My first major client was a foundation helping first-gen college students navigate the system alone, just like I had. We built a campaign that raised more than anyone expected in the first quarter. I didn't share that win with my parents. I shared it with Aunt Valerie, with my new team, with the people who had earned a seat at my table, the foundation. Later that year, Nate and I started our own foundation quietly. No press, no gala, just direct funding for scholarships, mental health services, and housing assistance for young adults coming from homes like mine, chaotic, conditional, emotionally unsafe. I remember one scholarship recipient, a young woman named Lily, who wrote me a handwritten letter. She said, "You turned your pain into purpose. You showed me I can do the same." I read that line 3 times, because that's what this journey had become. Not about revenge, not about proving anything to my parents, but about giving the next Lily the next autumn the freedom to step into her future without shame. The next chapter. 18 months after our wedding, I was standing barefoot in our kitchen when the test came back positive. Nate looked at me like I'd just handed him the stars. Tears spilled before I could even speak. A baby. A future. A chance to raise someone in the kind of home I always wished I'd had. When we told Claire and Harrison, they didn't cheer wildly or take over the moment. They just smiled deep and full and said, "We'll be whatever you need us to be." When we told my parents, the reactions were what you'd expect. Excitement that felt more about proximity than love. Assumptions about visits. Expectations. But I was ready. I set the boundary early. "This child will never have to earn your affection," I said over the phone. "And if that's not something you can promise, you won't be a part of their life." My mother tried to argue. I ended the call. And this time I didn't feel guilty. Reflection. People often ask me now quietly, over lunch or in late-night DMs, "How do you do it? How do you cut off people who raised you?" But that's the wrong question. I didn't cut them off. They walked away again and again until the space between us grew wide enough for me to build something beautiful in its place. Something rooted in respect. And what I've learned is this. Sometimes forgiveness is not letting someone back in. Sometimes it's letting go of the version of yourself that begged to be chosen by people who never really saw you. The gift. When I think about that morning, the note, the silence, the way the world seemed to collapse in one breath, I don't feel shame anymore. I feel gratitude. Because that day forced me to stop waiting for something that was never coming. It cleared the stage for the people who would show up. It made room for Claire and Harrison, for Aunt Valerie, for Nate, for the team at Kindle, for Lily, for every child our foundation will one day reach. For my child. That's the gift they didn't mean to give me, and it's the one I'll never stop protecting. If you've ever felt unseen by the people who should have protected you, if you've bent yourself into impossible shapes trying to be enough, if you've walked down an aisle, or into a boardroom, or onto a subway platform alone, I hope you know this. You don't have to keep proving your worth to people who only notice you when there's something in it for them. You get to draw a line. You get to build your own table. You get to choose peace over permission. Because the family you choose through love, loyalty, and shared truth can heal wounds you never thought would close. So if this story resonated with you, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments. When did you finally realize your worth wasn't tied to their approval? Thanks for listening. And whatever you're building now, keep going. You are enough. Always have been.